And Charan Singh Chita will join us in he'll be joining us. Dr. Charan Singh? Yeah, he will be joining us shortly.
It's a pleasure and honor to welcome you all to today's panel discussion on India's financial blueprint, what is expected from 2024-25 budget under the aegis of 4 Research Lounge. First and foremost, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed professors for the event, Dr. Kirit Parekh, Dr. Charan Singh, he'll be joining us shortly, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, who is joining us digitally from Mumbai, Professor Arpita Mukherjee, Professor Radhika Pandey, and Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia. We are honored to welcome our chairman, Sir Dr. BBL Madhukar, Vice Chairman, Sir Dr. Vinaysheel Gautam, Treasurer for School of Management, Mr. Vijay Gopal Pandey, our Director, Sir Dr. Subir Verma, to this event. We are also honored to welcome our Director General for Society, Dr. Jitendra Das. We also have with us distinguished Professor Sahai, Dean Academics, Dean Corporate Relations, Dean Research, respected professors, FPM scholars, students, and media representatives. The Union Budget is a crucial document that profoundly impacts the lives of every citizen and shapes the direction of various sectors in our economy. Understanding these expectations from the Union Budget will enable us to foresee potential changes and seize emerging opportunities. We have gathered here to discuss and dissect the potential impacts and implications of this highly anticipated financial blueprint. As we approach the announcement of Union Budget 2024-25, it is crucial to understand economic strategies and policies that will shape the future of our country. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from the experts who will provide us with their invaluable insights and perspectives, making this discussion enriching for all present here. I would now like to invite our Dean Research, Professor Suparna Basu, to give an inaugural address to the event. Please.
Very good morning. I'll keep it really, really brief. First of all, I begin by thanking Dr. BBL Madhukar, Chairman of Ford School of Management, without whose encouragement, in fact, this idea was conceived by him. Nothing would happen. And we scrambled together to put it together, and thanks to his support, as always. No intellectual conversation is really complete without our Vice Chairman, Dr. Vinaysheel Gautam. I mean, talk about a debate, talk about a challenge, and he throws us such challenges right, left, and center. I absolutely thank Treasurer Mr. Vijay Gopal Pandey for being instrumental in helping us put together this program. And our director, Professor Subir Verma, is rock solid behind us always. Our distinguished professor, Dr. Sahai, Director General Sir, Dr. Das, thank you for coming today. A very warm welcome. Well, Ayushi has already said that India's economy is growing despite weathering many macroeconomic headwinds since the pandemic years, including wars in Ukraine and West Asia. And there are, while we have a strong forecast of GDP, we would like to now, we have a brilliant convergence of economists, thinkers, and policymakers here with us today. And we would like to know for them, what would be the future strategies for India? What should we be looking for? What kind of equity which should we look for in the fiscal priorities? For example, what strikes me that private equity in education is very important for these schools like us to grow. So without much ado, let us debate, dissect, and discuss. Thank you. Over to you, Ayushi. And of course, we'll look forward to the panel discussion tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So our first speaker for the day, Dr. Kirit Shantilal Parekh, is the chairman of Integrated Research and Action for Development, New Delhi, and former member Planning Commission, Government of India. Sir is the former founder director, vice chancellor of Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai, which is an advanced research institute. Sir was honored with Padma Bhushan, the third highest civilian award by the President of India in March 2009. Sir has a Doctor of Science in Civil Engineering and a master's degree in economics from MIT, USA. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you here with us. Our next speaker, Dr. Charan Singh, will be joining us shortly. He is the CEO and founder director of Agro Foundation. Sir is also the non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. Earlier, Sir was the RBI chair professor of economics at the prestigious Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, senior economist at the IMF from August 2009 to December 2012, and research director of economic policy and debt management from 1997 to 2009. At RBI, where he joined as research officer in the economics department in 1984. Sir has started his career in 1983 as a management trainee in Punjab National Bank. Among other positions, Dr. Singh served on the board of National Housing Bank and NABARD Financial Services. Our next speaker, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, who is joining us digitally from Mumbai, is the chief economist at the Bank of Baroda. He is postgraduate in economics from Delhi School of Economics and graduated from St. Stephen's College in economics honors. He has been a corporate economist since 1987 and has worked in the fields of development banking, commercial banking, engineering, commodity markets, and credit ratings. Beside economics, he has multiple interests in human behavior, politics, and social systems. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Our next speaker, Professor Arpita Mukherjee, is a professor at ICRIER. She is an economic policy researcher and worked closely with governments and multilateral organizations across multiple geographies such as India, United Kingdom, United States, Australia, European Union, and ASEAN. Professor Mukherjee has over 25 years of experience in large project leadership roles. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Thank you, sir, for joining us. So Dr. Charan Singh is a CEO and founder director of Agro Foundation. Sir is also the non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. Earlier, Sir was the RBI chair professor of economics at the prestigious Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, senior economist at IMF from August 2009 to December 2012, and research director of economic policy and debt management from 1997 to 2009 at RBI, where he joined as a research officer in the economics department in 1984. Sir has started his career in 1983 as a management trainee in Punjab National Bank. Among other positions, Dr. Singh served on the board of National Housing Bank and NABARD Financial Services. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Our next speaker, Professor Radhika Pandey. She is an associate professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Dr. Pandey was the lead coordinator for the Ministry of Finance instituted task force on public debt management agency. She has also worked as a member of various research teams, such as Working Group on Foreign Investment chaired by UK Sinha and Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission chaired by retired Judge B.N. Sri Krishna. Dr. Pandey holds a PhD and MA in economics from JNV University, Jodhpur, and BA honors in economics from Banaras Hindu University. She writes a weekly column on current economic issues for the print and is also a part of weekly show on economy named Macro Sutra. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us. Next, our moderator for the panel discussion, Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia, is the co-founder of the Foundation for Economic Development. He has been working in economic policy analysis and research for 15 years. He was also the officer on duty to the first vice chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Arvind Panagaria, with whom he worked primarily on economic and governance policy. He also led the governance team at Central Square Foundation before starting FET. He has also worked in the policy team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has worked as a researcher at Brookings India, IFMR, and Indian School of Business, where along with other research works, he had co-authored a book, Makings of Miracles in Indian States, which looked at the economic growth experience of Indian states. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. It's a privilege to have you all here with us. I would now like to invite our FPM scholar, Sonika Jha, to felicitate Dr. Kirit Parikh. Sir, she'll be presenting. Now, I would like to invite our FPM scholar, Mr. Sahil Dua, to present sapling to Dr. Charan Singh. Next, I would like to invite our FPM scholar, Mr. Aman Maheshwari, to felicitate Professor Arpita Mukherjee. I would now like to invite FPM scholar Bhavya to felicitate Dr. Radhika Pandey. Now I would like to invite FPM scholar Soumya Tiwari to felicitate Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia. I would now request the moderator of the panel discussion, Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia, to start the discussion on India's financial blueprint, what is expected from the 2024-25 budget. Over to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for inviting me to moderate such an illustrious panel. Hard to imagine a better group of people to speak to a group like this. I won't take too much time. I think what I would like to start with, and especially since we have a group of students, is to first request my panel to give a set of opening remarks. One, just on the budget as a policy document, right? We often hear that the budget is very important, critical, but then at the same time, we hear from people that the budget should not be so overhyped and so instrumental as a policy document. The budget is a statement of the government's finances, not a policy instrument. So I would just like to hear perspectives from this panel just on this very fundamental thing, like what is your view on the budget as a policy instrument? How important is it? What should its role be? And I think for a group of students in particular, it would be an interesting thing to hear. The other thing, and we can either go around with one of this, but I think also, what is your wish list? What is your top 3 from the budget that we are going to come up with? Right? What are the things that if you were to put them in, you would? So we'll just go around. Should we start with Dr. Mukherjee? Yeah, we just, there's a mic there. I mean,
Good morning, everybody, and it's very interesting to be here. So Why is budget a policy? Why is budget such an important policy document? You see, budget is one of the many, according to me, it is one of the many policy documents. But to implement a policy, you need funding. And that's where everybody looks into the budget, because you can have a gala scheme, but unless it is funded, you will not be able to implement it. So therefore, they look at the budget as a eye opener and a document to look into what are the priorities in which the money is going to come in. That's my take on the budget. Regarding the budget, a budget has to be aligned with government plan and vision. And if I want to look at the plan and vision to make India a bigger player or to promote our exports, the visions that we are hearing for some time in the context of trade on which I work in, one is that you cannot establish a global value chain without imports today. But you need to import intermediate products and raw materials, not necessarily probably final products. So we need to really look at our inverted duties. We need to look at the intermediate products where we have actually put a restriction on import. I work very closely with the industry, and many a times I find in a very simple case like tea making, companies are not able to establish in India for their final product because tea is not about only tea leaves. Tea is about other ingredients. So if we put a heavy duty where the ingredients are not able to enter the market, which are added to the tea, the companies are not able to manufacture in India. So make in India, how to make it more. Also, we are doing the trade agreements. Also, we are doing trade agreements. So if we are doing trade agreements, one of the core things that you need to think is that, should I really have such high import duties or put it at an ASEAN level where I negotiate on other things? Because we waste a lot of negotiating energy on import duty. The other thing that I would like to talk about is GST. GST today was decided somewhat on the basis of what the state tax was, cut and pasted. Now it is a time to look at GST and think about it. For example, everybody is asking for PLI. We are giving concessions under PLI. We are giving concessions for sugar. We have put a 28% tax on colas, irrespective of whether they are fruit-based cola, sugar-based cola, and then we are putting a 12% sin tax. So if you're putting a 12% sin tax, why are we giving incentive under PLI? That's my question. So the entire incentive regime and the tax regime is not aligned. And if we have to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you have to look at certain areas like food, where the tax has to be aligned with the global competitive levels, and there should be nutrition linked taxes. These are some of my wish list. I'll come back to them.
Thank you, ma'am. Really appreciate it. Dr. Parekh, if you would please.
Good morning, distinguished people on the dais, off the dais, and the future distinguished people sitting at the back. I would like to sort of start with my few comments on the economy and where I think the budget should, what are the issues the budget should address. We all know that the macroeconomic parameters of the country, the indicators are very good. Current account deficit is down, fiscal deficit is down, economy is growing fairly high rate. The stock market is booming. And with all these signs, we are expecting a fairly high growth in the coming years. What I'm concerned about is that it is not just the short-term economy or short-term growth that the economy should be worried about. We should also consider what are the issues for long-term growth. What should make India, ensure India's long-term growth here. And here I think not this, I don't know how this budget is going to be, but not the budgets we have seen in the recent past or in the long past have not really addressed some of the long-term issues that the country faces. For example, we have neglected quality primary education for decades. And I just remember reading something about Vijayalakshmi Pandit when she was the Indian ambassador in Soviet Union during the 50s. She asked her servants or staff as to what they thought of the Soviet Union. And they were extremely happy and said, this is a great country. There are no beggars. There are no people on on the street asking for money, and all the children are going to school. So I think that was the vision that I think Soviet Union, China, and others have. They have really pushed primary education at a very high level. I think in today's world, however, we should not merely worry about primary education. We should also worry about higher education and our ability to be a world leader, or at least one of the world leaders in research and development and in technology development. And this is an area we have, I think, not neglected, but not given sufficient attention. I think also one other issue that I probably want to raise, in maybe this is a den of monetarists, but I'm not one of them. And I would say that, look, the interest rate in India should be brought down. All the Reserve Bank and others are saying that interest rate cannot be brought down because the inflation rate, the food inflation is very high. But how does food interest rate affect food supply? Really, this is not something that you will expect interest rate to do. The other argument that is given why interest rates are high and not being brought down is that if you bring down the inflation rate, all the foreign inflows that is coming into the country would dry up. And that Indian rupee will appreciate, and we would have lots of economic consequences. My feeling is that, we have a 650 billion plus reserves of foreign exchange. So you bring down the inflation rate, and that's the only way domestic capex will rise. Private firms in India are not investing, and that is because of a high interest rate. But if you bring down the interest rate, yes, the foreign flows will cease, but then Reserve Bank could unload some of its Reserve Bank thing to prevent rupee from appreciating. So I think one can certainly argue in many other ways, but let me just stop here. I will elaborate on this little later.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh. Dr. Singh, please.
So thanks for getting me over. It's really interesting to interact with the students. I'll focus my thoughts on what the budget is actually. My own feeling is that budget is just not a statement of account, which we are all waiting to see, revised estimates, budget estimates, final figures. It's not actually a statement of account. It is basically, as Professor Parekh mentioned, we have to look at growth. And to grow, we need two policies, monetary and fiscal policy. The task assigned to the monetary policy is interest rate, as Professor Parekh was elaborating. The task assigned to the fiscal policy is basically focus on growth, employment, and the instrument that they have is taxation and expenditure. So two different instruments and two different institutions, interest rates and the fiscal policy. So monetary policy, fiscal policy fits in. In the budget, while it's not a statement of account, it's not that the statement of account has to be neglected. Why? Because at the end of the year, every year, they come out and say they had announced certain things last year. Have they really done it? And then they say, this is what we are looking forward for the next year. Now, have they really done it? They quantify it with the data which they provide in the budget and say, look, we said we'll do this on this sector, this on this sector. And here is the data. You can see the revised estimates. We are on the track. So therefore, I think the fiscal policy reflection is so apparent. We're all waiting for it. Should there be a hype? Frankly speaking, in all the years that I've been abroad, I've never come to know a budget has been passed or not passed. The economy kept moving. But in our country, probably because we are still an emerging country and because maybe we are so much unemployed. So we have nothing else to do but look at the budget and analyze it for months together. First wait for it. Then on the day of the budget, make a big celebration festival. And then 10 days after that, all newspapers, media, everybody is only talking about the budget. That is okay. They have their own agenda to discuss. We have our own agenda to discuss. That's fine. But one thing is clear, that when we discuss so much about the fiscal policy, and the monetary policy. And now, of course, this is the festival for fiscal policy, because we discussed so much about the fiscal policy. The good thing is, in the country, the lawyers, the sociologists, everybody comes to know what a budget is. So in that sense, there's more social responsibility, more accountability, and all the media and all the newspaper and all the journalists are suddenly focused on what this whole thing is about. So I think in that sense, economists feel important. The profession of economist is able to survive, and at least one day, or call it 1 week in a
We
year,
get to do panel discussions.
we feel very, very important. So thank you for that. Otherwise, these days most economist jobs are taken by non-economists, be it any important economist position, but that's okay. Now, you were mentioning about the wish list. So my own wish list is 3, because I look at it from the angle of the policy. I believe, and I think as we move forward, and I'm going to take a cue from Professor Parekh, as we move forward, the debt and monetary management need to be separated, because they're sitting in one building in RBI, and I used to be a debt manager, as she just mentioned in my introduction. I've seen it. I was instrumental in setting up the debt management department in the Reserve Bank. My MPhil thesis, my PhD thesis, my postdoctorate research is all on debt management. I think debt management needs to be separated from the monetary. Monetary management should be allowed to only look at the interest rates and not carry the burden that I have to carry government's debt at a subsidized rate. Is it true? Do they subsidize the rate? Do they play? You can see my paper at the IIM Bangalore website, where I said that why don't you separate it? And I analyzed the data and I said, look, you might not be doing it deliberately, but something is fishy going on before the date of auction. Well, auctions are these days dime a dozen, and maybe they can't. But then the burden is there that you have to handle the interest rate in a way that the debt burden does not increase. Why not separate it and be more transparent? Today, debt management only sits as a chapter, single chapter in the annual report. Then we'll have a complete document on debt management and everybody will talk about it. So that's my first wish list. My second wish list is, and that is again related to this, the government fixes the inflation target for the RBI. And then the RBI has to follow that. Now, the target that was fixed for RBI in 2014 after the Urjit Patel committee report was 4 ± 2. Now, what is inflation targeting? It's a fiscal instrument, it's a monetary instrument. But the point is it's impacted because of the interest rate on debt management, and interest burden is very high, as you will see when the budget comes. It almost is equivalent to the income tax collection. It's very high. That needs to be taken care of. So my thought is that inflation target needs to be studied deeply. 10 years we have done it. We need to evaluate whether we should hold inflation target at 4 ± 2. And why do I say that? Because I believe in a young country like ours, absolutely young demographic country like ours, we have young people whose purchasing behavior, whose job seeking abilities and desire is much higher than that of an aging population in Japan. For Japan, 2% inflation target makes sense, or 3%. Of course, they couldn't even make it to that level. But in our country, if you take a 30-year average of inflation, it's about 6%. When you impose a 4% inflation target, then you are curtailing growth. The high interest rate means you are curtailing growth. So therefore, I am now wishing and hoping, and today you will find it in the newspaper, New India Express is carrying my thoughts on that, where I'm arguing that let's evaluate the inflation target, and let's revisit it. We need to revise it. That is the second wish list. I hope they carry it in the budget. The third is, now I'm above 60, as you can see. Now, if I'm above 60, obviously I'll think of the tribe of my elderly population. I think the elderly have served the country reasonably well to the best of their capabilities. But if you go to the market, you will find literature, you will find clothing stores, you will find books, you will find channels dedicated to the young children. They're the future. I totally agree. But we have spent our past for this future. So I think elderly people in the country, and they're more responsible, more accountable. They don't have time to go and blow the money on drugs or liquor or fancy entertainment. They will plow back the money into the family. I think the elderly pension scheme and the social security for the elderly with 15 crore of us above 60 has to be revisited. And I hope in the budget they take care of senior citizens. Over a period of time, I'm finding that the benefits to senior citizens have sort of taken the backseat or eroded in terms of concessions for air travel, train travel, and things like that. I think that is the third item that I would have in my mind if the budget can take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So in some sense, you're agreeing with Dr. Parekh when he says reduce inflation, reduce interest rates, increase inflation. Great. Before I come to you, Radhika, let's include the person we have online, Mr. Sabnavis, if you will, your views. We can't hear you. Could you just, you're on mute.
No, you need to allow me. Yeah, I think I was not allowed to unmute myself. Anyway, thanks a lot for calling me out here, and apologies for not being there physically. But I'll try and make the most of it, and I'll also keep it fairly short. Now, Rahul, I fully agree with you when you said in the beginning that the budget is an income expenditure statement. You know, when I was a student, that was in the 1980s, before I started working in 1987, the budget was actually an income expenditure statement as well as a balance sheet of the government, just like you had it for a company. But I think it's after the reforms period. I think none of the children out here were born at that particular point of time to know exactly what happened in 91, 92. It's after 92 that this particular budget became a kind of a policy document where the government tried to put in the ideology, what they were looking for in the medium term, short term, long term, and hence it became a comprehensive policy document. But the way I look at it is that it is an income statement because you're looking at where the money is coming from all the possible sources. We also have something called the FRBM, which puts a limit to the amount you can borrow in the market. So therefore, you know what is your revenue coming in the form of tax, non-tax, disinvestment, borrowings which can be done. And then you try and make the best of it. So if I go back to our public finance textbooks where we are talking of the main job of the government is redistribution, I think that is very important. So with all the money which I get, there are certain commitments which you have. And I say commitments, you have to pay interest on the loans which you have borrowed. So that is something which cannot be escaped. You have something called subsidies. I think that's a very good way of going about redistribution in a country like us. So today, just mind you that the government is still giving 800 million people free food, which means we have high levels of deprivation in the country, something which the government cannot really wash its hands off. So this is a kind of a compulsion which is there. And at the end of the day, you say, okay, I've done all this. Now let me see if there is something left for the growth process. So when we talk of growth being an integral part of the budget, yes, I'm able to do it directly in the form of saying that if I spend more on roads, railways, urban development, then I'm able to contribute in the form of growth. So this is the CapEx part of it. So this is broadly speaking, what is the budget and the approach which is taking the budget. Then of course, there are lots of slogans which are thrown in the budget. Lots of ideologies, lots of targeting, which is done. But at the end of the day, it's just a case of saying if I'm receiving 100 rupees in the form of revenue, as well as what I can borrow, because there's something called a fiscal deficit ratio, which I'm going to go towards 4.5%. This is what I have in my hands. I'm going to spend 100 rupees. Some of them is committed in the form of subsidies, in the form of salaries, pensions, so on and so forth. And what is left behind, maybe 11 rupees, which is left behind, I'm going to use it for capital expenditure. That is how I look at the budget. Now, what kind of wish list do we have? If you see the problems today, okay, India is doing very well in terms of growth, but you look at the internals, there is some problem in terms of consumption. Okay, we've had very high inflation, so therefore consumption has been affected. So how do I address consumption? I obviously need to change the tax structure. Today, the middle class or the salaried class is the one which is paying all the taxes. So can I provide certain kind of relief in terms of income tax? I think it's very much due. Every budget we are told that, look, conditions are difficult, so let's wait for next year. Then the next year comes, nothing happens. Again, we wait for next year. I think this is a time when you can do something in terms of increasing the slabs, increasing the exemption limit, widening the slabs of tax, of income tax, so that at the end of the day, I'm able to provide additional purchasing power to people. Now, can it actually change the economy in a big way? The answer is no. But in a minimalist way, it will be able to, at a margin, increase the purchasing power of people who have gotten affected. In fact, I would say that ideally, all your income tax slabs should be linked with inflation. You say that if inflation is 5%, if my minimum tax rate, for a slab of say 5 lakhs, it goes up by 5% every year, according to inflation. That way, I have an automatic process in which people are protected. Second, the other issue we have is that savings are not increasing, which is a fact. If you look at financial savings, they have been coming down. The ratio is coming down. Now, why is it coming down? Because people are spending more. People are spending more, not because I'm consuming more, but because of higher inflation. So how do I attack the issue of savings? Give tax incentives. So we have something called the new tax scheme. We have something called the old tax scheme for the income tax payers. The old tax scheme has all allowances made for savings. So if I have this Section 80C, if I'm able to increase it from 1.5 to 3 lakhs, interest on housing loans is today exempt for 2 lakhs, make 2 lakhs into 4 lakhs. This is one way in which I'll be able to increase savings in the economy. So this is point number 2. Point number 3, we are all saying the private sector investment is not picking up. So we have done every possible thing to increase private sector investment, but it doesn't take off. So here actually, I think Dr. Parekh made a very provocative statement saying that interest rates should actually be coming down to bring about growth. I don't agree with it at all. When interest rates were very high in 2010, 11, 12, 13, people invested. So the issue is if I have very good demand, I will invest even though interest rates are high. Why? Because interest costs on an average, if you look at the corporate balance sheets, not more than 3%, 2 to 3% of your turnover is your interest costs. So it's something like saying, I don't buy a house today because interest rates are high. I buy a house because of the cost of the house, the income which I have. Just because the banks are charging me 9% and not 8% doesn't mean I'm not going to buy a house. So I think that is the logic which really holds out here. Investment will take place when there is demand. So I need to create demand. So today, why is Hindustan Lever not investing? They have surplus capacity. Why is JSW Steel investing? Because there's lots of demand for steel. So investment is something which takes place when your capacity utilization rates go up. Capacity utilization rates go up when there is demand. There is more demand in case there's more income. There's more income in case there are more jobs. So that's the broader issue. You create jobs. All this doesn't happen in the budget time frame. It happens over a period of time. So we need to focus on that. That's a different kind of an issue. So to increase investment, my suggestion would be what I would be looking out for, do something for the MSMEs. We have the PLI scheme, which is a grand scheme. It hasn't worked. It's worked for electronics, for no other industry. Okay, because you're supposed to invest a certain amount, you're supposed to create a certain kind of incremental output, then you're going to get a 5% return on the incremental output. So obviously, these conditions have not been met. 4 years of PLI are over. If you see the government to spend not more than 20,000 crores out of the 2 lakh crores, which was budgeted for 5 years, which means we have an issue out here. So I think have a PLI scheme for the MSMEs. MSMEs contribute to employment, to contribute to exports, to industrial growth. Keep a smaller amount of scheme of say 2,000 or 3,000 crores. You will be able to meet all these objectives, and you can also probably revive some bit of investment from this particular section. And just to, again, Dr. Charan Singh and I, we had a different view, which we expressed on another forum when we spoke about the separation of debt and monetary management of the RBI. I would just reiterate again out here saying that the two of them have actually been together for the reason that because I have the single entity which is managing both public debt as well as monetary policy, there is an incentive to keep interest rates low. So what you're saying, Dr. Charan Singh, I agree with you. So today we're saying we're artificially depressing the interest rate on the guise of saying that, look, I want the government to borrow low. I want the private sector to invest. The private sector is not investing. You gave them your corporate tax benefit in 2019. Investment did not pick up. Okay, that was the time when the FM said, I'm hoping that private sector is going to invest. COVID, we had the lowest interest rates. Why is it that private sector did not invest? Because demand was not there. Just remember one thing, private sector invests only when there's return on capital. Because at the end of the day, the private sector is answerable to the shareholders. I can't say I'm building roads for the sake of making all of us happy here in this panel discussion, and I'm pushing up GDP growth because I'm not making a profit. So I need to make sure that I'm able to generate sales, generate the turnover, create that PBDIT, that PAT which comes in so that the shareholders finally are happy with my performance. And if I'm the CEO, I'm rewarded with my ESOP, so on and so forth. Okay, that's the harsh truth which is there. So to my mind, we are not pricing capital in the right way in India. We are a capital scarce economy. We don't have enough money for infrastructure. Private sector does not have it. We don't have the institutional command. We can't make the banks actually lend for infrastructure. We had DFIs earlier, which were all converted into commercial banks because the model did not work. So I think there are more deep-rooted issues out there. So I think we need to price capital in the right manner. And I think when we do this inflation targeting, yesterday the RBI came up with something called a neutral interest rate, basically talking of a real interest rate of 1.4 to 1.9%. That really makes sense. And again, to add on to what Dr. Charan Singh said, I think that's contradictory to what Dr. Parekh is saying. You bring down interest rates any further, the senior citizens are going to die. Okay, because we all live on fixed deposits. Even I'm a senior citizen, all my money is in a fixed deposit. On a fixed deposit, you get 7%. You pay tax of 30% or whatever your tax rate is on it. You will not be able to live a comfortable life because I'm not pricing capital. I'm trying to make sure that the capitalists, the borrowers, are able to borrow at a lower rate. That should not be the case. We should have something driven by economic rationale. Inflation is very much important. I agree with what Dr. Parekh said. By increasing the repo rate, I cannot bring down the price of onions. But I think everything has to be calibrated against the headline inflation number. Real return of 1.5% to 2%. That's when we will have a fair system in the economy. And then we don't have to allocate budget saying that I want to help out the poor people, I want to help out the young people, the old people. We won't be having that kind of a system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabnois, for exciting the panel a little bit. There's some friction here, which we'll come back to. I think it's very interesting points, and I'll see if there are responses from either Dr. Charan Singh or Dr. Parekh. But first, Radhika, please.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I will just build upon what my esteemed panelists have already spoken about. One is about the importance of budget. We've heard that it's a statement of accounts and expenditure. But in addition to that, what makes this year's budget more interesting and what we should look for is the change political landscape. You know, now we are coming, we are now going to witness the first full budget of the third tenure of this government, and this is not an absolute majority government, this is a coalition government. So how will the government navigate the various conflicting, seemingly conflicting demands? Because till now we have seen that the government has had an unambiguous focus on capital expenditure, and given that now there will be demands, we have already seen there are demands from coalition partners on providing special category status to Bihar and Andhra Pradesh. So how the government is going to navigate its various challenges, you know, without losing focus on fiscal consolidation. Because one of the prime focus of this government has been fiscal consolidation. After the deviation at the time of COVID, we have seen that the government has consistently delivered on fiscal deficit. They have tried to do better on their budgeted estimates. But now, how will the government navigate the challenges? Will the focus on capex continue, or will there be some deviation from the stated fiscal targets? That is a very interesting watch for this budget. Now, coming to the wish lists, I think we have to first understand the macro fiscal backdrop within which this budget is being presented. We've heard about from our esteemed panelists, we've seen that overall, if we look at the aggregate numbers, economy is doing quite well. We've seen that the real GDP posted a growth of 8.2% for the last financial year. For this year also, there is expectation of above 7% growth, and IMF has revised its projections upwards. ADB has revised its projections upwards. Fiscal deficit, we have done better. Current account deficit, we had a surplus for the fourth quarter. So on twin deficits, there is no problem. But when we go delve deeper and look into the sectoral growths, there is where we get into the problems. And as Dr. Sabnois pointed out about the consumption slowdown. So the aggregate numbers mask the sectoral disparities. We've seen that consumption has consistently underperformed. Real consumption growth has been just 4% for this financial year. This is half of the overall growth. And given that consumption accounts for 60% of GDP, We cannot have a low consumption growth for a sustained period of time. And that is perhaps one reason why private investment is also not picking up, because there is lack of adequate demand. Demand is not broad-based, demand is uneven. If we look at various high frequency indicators, we can see, if we look at car sales, which is a very important indicator, there we can see the unevenness. Passenger car sales is not performing well. The SUVs are performing well, the demand for SUVs. So there is an unevenness in demand. And also one of the main factor contributing to this is high inflation. And there also we see that there is a wedge between rural and urban inflation. Rural inflation is almost 3%, almost 2.5 to 3% higher than urban inflation, because food inflation is higher. And food inflation is a bigger proportion in the rural sector. So it's more hurting the rural poor. So with this background, we can articulate, we can think of what the budget should be doing. Certainly something to boost demand, which could be in the form of income tax concession. We've seen that the government has cut corporate tax rates, but on income tax, we've seen that the government has introduced the new tax regime, which is a more simplified structure without exemptions and deduction. But now is the time to at least give some signal to boost demand, because that is which is needed to boost sentiments in the economy also. So that is number one. The other is something to do about job creation. Now, we have a very interesting database which was released by the RBI a couple of days back, which is called the CLEMS database, the Capital, Labor, Energy, Material Services database. It tells us a lot about the structure of the economy. It is telling us that the manufacturing sector is becoming more, is capital intensive, and the labor productivity has not increased. Whatever employment generation is happening in agriculture, construction, and trade, major part. Even now, 43% of the employment generation is happening in agriculture. But if we look at the productivity, it is one of the lowest in agriculture. So the challenge before the government in the medium term, and the steps should start from the budget, is to see how surplus labor from agriculture could be migrated to non-agricultural sectors, to industry and services. And towards that, some steps need to be taken. Some steps could be taken for semi-skilled and unskilled workers, and steps are needed for skilled employment. What could be done is to have a kind of a national skill survey to at least assess where there is a skill deficit. What is the ask of the industry, and what is what is being imparted by the academia. So some form of greater collaboration, some form of greater concession, tax ops, some form of incentives towards greater industry academia collaboration to ensure that the skill gap is bridged. That is something very important. So first is boosting consumption. Second is more emphasis towards job creation for the labor intensive sectors. We have had PLI. Now, is it time to have some kind of employment linked incentive scheme, particularly for labor intensive sectors? That is something for the government to mull about, to think about. And the last the thing is climate change. This is something which is a very daunting challenge, and steps need to be taken from the budget itself. We have seen that agriculture, food production has been impacted due to climate change. We have seen food inflation is increasing due to adverse weather events, erratic weather conditions. So greater steps have to be taken to increase research and development towards building towards climate resilient seeds, towards more real-time data, so that farmers also know about the climate change. So some attempts towards mitigation of climate change. It requires a holistic strategy, but some attempts can be undertaken through the budget. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll just very quickly summarize a few key themes that came through and give a little bit of my own input onto that. I think one thing that we heard was the importance of demand, right? And obviously, demand is not important solely, neither is interest rates important solely, right? It's always ceteris paribus, everything else kept equal, right? So I think that is a bridge between what Dr. Sabnavis is saying and what Dr. Singh and Dr. Parikh were saying earlier, right? That demand held equal, lowering interest rates obviously will increase investment. Interest rates held equal, increasing demands will obviously increase investment also, right? So we must see these as an equilibrium effect, not as each thing in isolation. All of these things matter. The thing that only Dr. Mukherjee touched on, and I want to expand on that a little bit because it's really important, is that we must not focus purely on domestic demand as a driver of investment and growth, right? We think of ourselves as a large economy. In the global perspective, India is actually a tiny economy, especially on a per capita basis, right? On a per capita basis, India ranks, I think, 143rd out of 195 countries, right? So we have a big market because we have a lot of people. But we have a lot of people, that implies we also have a lot of workers. We also have a lot of people whose supply has to be taken care of. So international markets are very critical for us, and international demand and tapping international demand is very critical. And Dr. Mukherjee touched on how we can do that. From that, I'll just quickly pass on to sort of what is the next. It was a fantastic wish list. I think really important, really interesting stuff. Radhika's already stolen my intro to my next section, which was, the political situation has changed. But thank you for doing that. You're saving me the effort. But keeping that background in mind, I want to ask each of our panelists, what is their expectation from this new government and their new budget, right? So things are very different from what they used to be. There isn't a lot of news in the policy circles about what really are the policy decisions or budget decisions that are going to happen. So I'm very interested in learning more from our panel. This time, maybe we'll just switch up the order a little bit. We'll start with Dr. Parikh. Dr. Parikh, could you please?
Well, in the past, the budget has been very, very exciting for many people, simply because in every budget, it changed tax rates of one kind and the other, the duty rates and so on. And it affected lots of people who are particularly the industry and others. We hope the budget becomes completely uninteresting to a large number of people, and that the tax rates, etc., remain stable so that you don't keep changing it. What I would like to see the budget address long-term issues, as I said, from growth. Now, one of the things is saying, okay, we need to increase domestic capital expenditure. At the same time, we need to promote demand. But to increase demand, we really need to worry about unemployment as well, because there is a significant part of it. And I think what we are seeing today is a large amount of demand growth taking place in a very super luxury goods, but very little in the common man's consumption basket. And I think this is where the government needs to really take some actions. Education, which I think is extremely important. We've been promising 6% of our GDP devoted to agriculture. We have never done that. And I think this is, and on the contrary, what we have done is we are making education very private sector determined, very high tuition fees. I don't know what the tuition fees here are, but I'm sure they are beyond the reach of most people in the rural areas and so on. So I think what we need to do is to make education and a quality education available to everyone. The ASR report on state of education shows a large number of people do not really have adequate understanding. They can't even read class 2 texts and so on. So I think if you have that kind of an education, you will have a poor workforce, you will have poor labor productivity, not just in 10 or 15 years down the line when these people join this. So I think it is extremely critical we emphasize primary education. Why did I earlier say that we should also worry about higher education and research and development? I think, yes, we have done quite a lot in setting up IITs and so on, but among the top Indian universities and global universities or educational institutions, hardly any Indian institution appears. And this is what we have to understand. Why is it that Number of Chinese institutes and universities have come in the last few years in the top 100 universities in the world, or top 10, one should say, and none of the Indian universities there. And that is where I think is a very serious question we should ask ourselves and do it. The Chinese are going ahead with tomorrow's technology, development of that, and they're ahead in most of these. And I think we really need to have that kind of a vision for what kind of technologies would be required for tomorrow.
Thank
Today,
you.
we have a GPT is one thing which we're all concerned about. That will perhaps reduce the employment even further and increase the unemployment rate. So I believe that we need to significantly worry about how do we make the technological change in our own interest. And I think this is really critical, and one should spend a lot of money on this, on all kinds of, our expenditure on R&D is minuscule compared to many other countries. The second point I would like to make is that climate change is a very big threat in India. Now, if India wants to push, say, renewable power, now recognize many people say that solar PV power has become competitive to coal-based power. Yes, that's true when solar power is available, but and it's available only about 18% of the time in a year, whereas a coal-based power plant is available 80% of the time. So if I want to replace 1 megawatt of coal-based power plant, I will need 4 megawatts to invest in 4 megawatts of solar power plants. And solar have a much higher capital requirement upfront than coal. So really, I think we need to invest 4 or 5 times more compared to coal-based power plant. And that requires really a long-term cheap capital availability. And that is one step I think the government should take in which make sure that this is available. Today, we are forcing DISCOMs, distribution companies in state to buy renewables at a certain proportion of their distribution by what is called renewable portfolio obligation. But I think that is a policy which has not worked because many DISCOMs do not fulfill that. And the reason why they can't fulfill is also obvious, because many of them have a long-term power purchase agreement with coal power plants. So if they buy renewables, they will still have to pay the capital charge for the coal power plants, and that will be higher cost, more expensive than the others. So I think we need to really address the whole issue of how do we steer this growth of renewables in a way that really doesn't disturb and destroy the power sector development in its turn. I think the second point is that where do we get this cheap long-term capital? Obviously, I think in any reasonably, you could say just international order, but unfortunately we don't have that. One would put a tax on not carbon tax, which is what lots of people are emitting, because the total global warming effect that takes place on the basis of total cumulated emissions in the global environment. And so you should really put a tax on the cumulated emissions of the global environment and ask everyone to pay maybe $1 a ton of CO2 parked in the global environment since 1990. Why since 1990? Because 1990 was the year when the conference for Rio conferences preparation started, and almost all countries became aware of the threat of climate change. So nobody can say that I wasn't aware of it. And I think, so if you collect that, you can collect something like, $700–800 billion a year. I think to make it palatable, one can say 80% of this would be dispersed back to the country if they show that they have spent this money on mitigating or climate change measures, so that we will promote this and so on. But anyway, this is, as I said, the world is not just in real sense. So this is not a possible solutions in some sense. But India needs to worry about how do we get low-cost capital. Again, I would say reduce its interest rate. That can really bring the capital low. And secondly, I think we have been arguing for having, labor-intensive agriculture, manufacturing for many, many years. But unfortunately, labor-intensive employment problems of MSMEs have really gone down in the recent years. And I think what we need to worry about is how do we revive this again? How do we make sure that people get employment? And that, as I said, again, and I'll come back, we must have a quality labor force. And investment in labor is as important as investing in capital formation and so on. So I think I would really hope that the budget addresses some of these long-term issues, and that the short-term changes in tax rate should not be a part of the budget. It should not make it such an important event from
Thank
that
you,
point of
Dr. Parikh. And these are our wish lists. I think I'll request Dr. Mukherjee to look into her crystal ball and see if these expectations can be met. Like, what do you think the government is going to do? Like, what is the budget actually going to look like?
See, basically, just to tell you that, basically government always does create a budget under different scenarios, right? We heard there is a political compulsion of the coalition government. There is a global environment. India may be shining, but the world is not. Today, the global growth rate is low, global trade is slow, you have geopolitical tensions. So far, we have been doing well in the global circumstances. But if you look at each of these topics, it has a global angle, right? When we are talking about carbon tax, it's the EU who has moved it. When we are talking about work, now we are not talking about employment anymore in a global context. It is ILO Decent Work 8, which means it is, even if you have a contract labor, whether you are giving that contract, you're meeting the 4 occupational code, which is by itself very costly. So it is not about, if you just say, okay, can we give incentives linked to employment and create contract labor, you are not going to be able to export. So the point is that if you look at the new EU directive, which came up in April, is, if you want to meet those directives, what you need to think is, and if we are thinking from the perspective of exporting, as well as like to create both the domestic and the foreign market, like the way you have to think what the foreign market is asking for today. So they are asking you to have a product traceability, to look at health requirements, and the quality requirements and high level of standards. And if we don't meet it, we can fight and say it is very difficult. Cambodia will go and meet it tomorrow. And we are facing that in many of our product categories. So whether we want to continue to, how to upgrade to that level is where the extra money should be spent, and how to attract industry to upgrade is where the subsidy should go. So basically what I'm trying to say is that subsidy should look at where the global interest is. The interest is in technology, interest is in climate change, interest is in decent labor standard, labor work, and that's where you think about how do I subsidize in the long run, because that will be in the interest of the country as well. There are certain areas which we don't discuss too much in panel like this. One of them is health. Like if you have the largest population, it can be a good or a burden. And if you do a meta-analysis of the data, and you will suddenly find out vitamin D deficiency is 1 in 5 Indians are vitamin D deficient. It was kind of a shock to us when we were working, because you look at anemia, iron, and all of that, you hear tuberculosis. Now, this doesn't have any program. Now, how do you actually not link a program with a panic that is happening in the country? Now, now we are talking about even public distribution systems. We are talking about food security, and for the food security, we are giving khichuris to the kids and stuff like that. Is that good enough for a good health? And when they're testing on the children, that is not good enough for a good health. So unfortunately, because our health surveys come very late and we have a budget every year, we have to somewhere think before, we get the data. And ICMR is doing a big survey, and probably next year they will come out with a big diet data. And you would realize that the nutrition is going to be a bigger factor than food security. So you are moving from food security to nutrition, you're moving from employment to decent jobs. So these futuristic thought processes, I completely agree with Dr. Kirit that we have to think a little long term, and these futuristic thought processes have to be in the budget. The other thing that is totally missing from the budget is we give schemes for exports. Like we will say, if you export, we will give this, that, and even PLI is actually a WTO actionable subsidy. So you can produce and sell in India, but if you want to sell abroad, you will face countervailing duties. So if you think big and think global, then you need to design your schemes which are WTO compliant. Now, even zones are not WTO compliant, but WTO also has its, being laid in a intensive care. WTO gives enough room for countries to be smarter. And your one way is to subsidize services. That is employment and all the other things that we are talking about is actually the services that is going into manufacturing. And today services account for 30 to 40%, and if not more, of any manufacturing as they automate. So we need to think. It is not like just employment for manufacturing, creating jobs. We need to think, how do we move it into a picture which is globally compliant, cannot be challenged, interestingly helping us to grow, pushing our industry to upgrade. And that is where the thought has to come into the budget through the taxes and incentives, because Indian industries and everybody reacts to taxes and incentive. My last point is, if 85% of the global trade and even 90% in case of ASEAN is led by MSMEs, now we really cannot just ignore them and think of big players will drive the Indian growth strategies, big players will drive the exports. So we have to think about them. I completely agree on that MSME point. I also think that there are within MSME focus groups. Like now people are thinking about not only MSMEs in export. I'll give you an interesting example. We are pushing for MSMEs in export, MSME schemes, but in exports you don't have a issue in import. You can import whatever, but if you export through express delivery services, there is a value limit. Can you imagine? So if you are exporting 4 lehengas by any designer of India, you are packaging it in 4 boxes. So why would any country have an export limit? If you look at the amount of money a person spends on export, it is much higher than he spends on import. Because in import, there is one regulator, FSSAI. In export, you export spices, you have regulator APIDA for organic, spice board for spices. Now there is a national turmeric board, whether alive or dead, nobody knows. But the fact remains is your spices are getting hacked in Singapore. So you have to resolve this. You have to resolve your barriers to export by reducing this regulatory cost and other costs. This is not a part of the budget, but the budget has to think through, and they may have to push the line ministry to respond that what are all these agencies doing.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll change the question up slightly for Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, I think one theme that came out earlier was that while growth has been increasing, there are certain worrying aspects, right? So private investment has been quite low. FDI has been dropping, right? General consumption is low. Export growth actually has been very slow. If you look at the non-oil component in the last 10 years or so, I think CAGR of exports is 2% or 2.5% or something like that. So, and Dr. Mukherjee pointed to one very important aspect of that, which is that just from a regulatory burden perspective, from a policy stability and uncertainty perspective, we have really been handicapping our own industry in some sense, right? How much of this perspective do you agree with? What are your thoughts on why is private investment so stubbornly low in the last few years? What can be done? Just why don't you just take that?
Partly, Professor Radhika covered it in her initial comments. Before I come to these specific questions, Rahul, I'm so excited with the observations that were made by others. Can I just spend 2 minutes in
Please.
commenting on that? Professor Mukherjee, you are so right. After agriculture, MSMEs are the best employers. There are 7 crore of them employing 14 crore people. So what is the policy on MSMEs? Just defining, just changing the definition, is that going to take us too far? Even before I comment on that, Rahul, I would like to mention the change scenario in the parliament, which he flagged, is, I think, going to bring to the core focus 2 things: prices and employment. The whole election has been fought on that, and the results have changed because of that. The narrative has changed because of that. Now, can you imagine when I was a young boy, tomato prices and potato prices and onion prices made a big difference. And now I'm aged, the same thing today while going to the market, 100 rupees tomato, 70 rupees, what is going on? So I think the government will have to do something for these little things that change the whole CPI. Now, why is it important? Because it changes the household budget instantly. And we Indians, if we are used to Indian onion, the American onion will not be comfortable in our kitchen, right? So we need an Indian onion, and we can't do anything until we produce more. Same as with the tomato. So therefore, I think prices is going to become an important issue in discussion in the parliament, and something will have to be done for these commodities, which for years together have changed the CPI, and then rating agencies come in, the interest rate gets quickly spoken about, the MPC follows it. Many things happen unnecessarily just because one tomato price has gone.
Yeah, can I just follow up a little bit on that? That's a very scary statement to me, because government's typical response on prices is to try and control it somehow, right? Which, as economists, we understand in the medium to long term always backfires, unintended consequences. So just if you could just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. See, I would like to also mention one more thing. Professor Parekh is right. We need a vision. The Prime Minister has given a vision. I want to be a developed country by 2047. I want to double the GDP. But then you also pointed out the per capita income is a long way to go. 82,000 is the per capita of America. 2,000 odd is my per capita income. China is way ahead in 12,000. So short terms make a long term. And that is why I always keep saying the fiscal responsibility budget management targets, there's a vision. I've never met the target. Inflation targeting, there's a target. I've never met the target. So short terms make the long term. And in this short term, the next 5 years that I see, prices are going to make a very big difference. The other is employment. Now, in employment, I totally agree with Madam Radhika, with Professor Mukherjee. MSMEs are going to play an important role. Now, yes, where is the policy on MSME? So therefore, I have been suggesting now for 5 years, like you had the IIMs, you have the IITs, you have the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Now you need MSME university. Like the agriculture universities came and took care of the agriculture sector totally, and from food total dependency to PL 480, now we are exporting. So total independency of food. So I think MSME universities, I'm not talking of a skill university, it is far short of the expectation. I'm not talking of ITIs, which produces plumbers, electricians. We need them, but I'm not talking of that. I'm talking of a far more institute of entrepreneurships, which produces entrepreneurs who can handle global markets, who can handle HR, who can handle finances, and who can now take care and become the backbone. As agriculture, we are now totally safe. Employment, we are not safe. Public sector will not be able to give you jobs. AI and ML is playing a big role. Private sector will not be able to give you jobs. They have to be now self-employment. That's very important. The other point which professor made, and he's a dawn in climate. We all look forward to his views on it. I have a feeling now that retrofitting can help us. Otherwise, it's a massive task to really go for the big climate change. Carbon tax has been tested. All that has happened. The countries which are the most polluting are the least, are the most deaf. And we are the only ones who have to always rise and say, okay, I'll do something. But they are totally deaf. And after COVID, they've become deafer. Right? So I think one alternative I have been thinking is a retrofit, but in immediate can help us, and then we can move to clean energy and all. Now, the pointed questions that you made, partly because she has agreed, so I can be little quick on that. My own feeling is we're all in an economic and academic environment. We know the reasons of FDI and private investment, but I'd like to add few points. The ease of doing business, whatever said and done, we have moved up the scale, but we are not number 1, number 10, number 20, number 50. We have not come up that high. We are still around 63 in the ease of doing business. So I think we have a long distance to cover. The interest rate is again another factor. If you keep saying that I have raised the interest rates because in America inflation is very high and the Fed is raising the interest rate, so to match it, I have to raise it. And if the Fed keeps saying the Russia-Ukraine war and in the Middle East and the OPEC production, and for all these reasons, I can't reduce the interest rate, then the whole industry, everybody, even me who has to buy a new car, knows that the interest rates are higher only for a short-term basis. Today, tomorrow, or maybe next year, they will come down. Obviously, I'll postpone my investment decisions, be it a house, be it setting up a factory, or any of these things. And these immediately then impact the private sector. When the private sector knows private consumption expenditure is one variable, the other variables which he said are very volatile and very mixed indicators are true. Means car and SUV example she gave is very valid. So therefore, I think it is firstly the ease of doing business, which is also impacting FDI. The other is the private investment getting impacted because the interest rate phenomena, which is so high right now, I think at its peak, is a short-term phenomenon. But this short-term is becoming nearly 2 years. And therefore, I think these all are getting postponed. As far as the issue of FDI is concerned, please understand that the whole world, of course, in the last quarter, first quarter, it's been a little change in the trend. But please understand the whole world has passed through a very difficult time. Very difficult time. COVID has happened, but COVID is not just one thing that happened. Lehman Brothers had yet not been forgotten when COVID came riding over it. While we were still recovering from COVID, the war took place. After how many years did the war take place in Europe? I think after 75 years. That also totally changed the whole thing, changed the narrative. Now suddenly it became not Russia, Ukraine. It became Russia versus NATO. And then the whole Europe gets involved into it. Given the scenario that we had, and I would also say we are an academic institution, I like to think freely, our own change in stance that happened, our movement towards the American and then what was happening in Russia, the uncertainties that prevailed have also impacted FDI to some extent. On one hand, the global situation is grim. On the other hand, our policies have seen a little shift. So that also could have impacted the FDI. And in general, I think countries from where we have been getting FDI, Japan is one of them, US is one. Japan itself is getting into some trouble. They had recently a shutdown of their own automobile plant. So that made a very big difference. So I think both these factors, FDI and the investment, have to be seen in the context of the global scenario, as well as the uncertainties prevailing domestically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Radhika, views on what the government will do or will not do, and any other, I mean, we're also almost out of time, so I'll just take sort of closing remarks. So any other points also, if you have that you would like to cover that you haven't already, please do.
So one is again talking about the fiscal landscape. fiscal landscape, if we talk about, the question that you raised earlier about, having, now that we have a different political setup, so how the priorities could change, what are the challenges? This is again a very, a challenge that we will have to see not only this year, but in the medium term. Now, this year, we know that the government has got, in terms of its bounty, it has got RBI dividend about 2.11 lakh crore. It has got this in addition to what was budgeted. What was budgeted was around 1 lakh crore, but the government has got 1 lakh crore extra. So for this year, there is an additional fiscal space to address some of the demands of the coalition partners. But going forward, very important is to have a medium-term debt strategy, a medium-term fiscal strategy. We've talked about the FRBM, and now if we look at here the text of the FRBM, it has not been amended since 2018. So it's still showing 3% target, and till 2021, it has not been amended. So in the light of the changed realities, in the light of the geopolitical tensions, it is important for the government to articulate a medium-term debt strategy. So there is a fiscal deficit target of 4.5% by FY26, that is next financial year. But what after that? So I think budget should be an opportunity for the government to, address this amendment in the FRBM and come up with a revised glide path for fiscal policy and debt. And why it's even more relevant now, because we know that Indian government bonds have now been included in the global bond indices. Indian bonds, government bonds are part of the JP Morgan index. So in that context, our fiscal policy, our debt policy will be closely watched. And if we can signal that there is a certain level of fiscal transparency that will help in greater flows and that will help in reducing the cost of borrowing, which is very critical at this point in time, when our debt to GDP ratio, the general government debt to GDP ratio is still above 82%. So we are one of the highest in terms of general government debt. We have high debt to GDP ratio as compared to our peer economies. And that is something which is flagged by credit rating agencies also, that, we cannot upgrade unless there is a secular decline in debt to GDP ratio. And towards meeting all those expectations, I think the first step should be that the budget should articulate a medium-term debt and deficit strategy, which will give a signal to investors that the government is serious about fiscal consolidation, whatever it may be. It may be gradual, given the constraints of coalition politics. It may be gradual. It may not be very aggressive, given the various domestic challenges that the government has to address. But at least come up with a fiscal and debt management strategy to impart a level of discipline and transparency, which will be critical for foreign investment. It will bring down the cost of borrowing, and that will have ramifications for the cost of debt for private sector as well, because government debt acts as a benchmark for corporate bonds. So it will give a fillip to the corporate debt market also. The company's cost of borrowing will also come down if the government cost of borrowing comes down. So I think all these steps are very important in light of the change scenario. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sabnawis, last but not least, I would obviously ask the same question to you. What is your expectation in general from the budget in terms of what you think they will do? But one specific question that I also had for you, there have been several commentators who've been saying true disinvestment needs to happen. It hasn't. It's been one PSU sort of moving to another PSU largely apart from the sale of Air India. So just if you have any particular views on that, especially on I mean, you work at a public sector bank, so especially on public sector banks and disinvestment there, any views that you have would be very interesting to hear.
Okay. I would again start off on a slightly controversial note, because I think most of the panelists have been talking about what all the government should do, look at a long run, look at a medium run. But, when I look at the budget, I'll go back to what Rahul, what you started off and what I say that this is an income statement, income expenditure statement. So if you have to get practical about it, we are talking of a budget in the size of 47, 48 lakh crores, of which statutorily or based on whatever the government has decided on, 3 lakh crores actually gets transferred to the states. So I'm actually talking of 44, 45 lakh crores of budget. That was the interim budget. And if you look at all the expenditures which are more or less committed, we have seen that it will be more in the region of around 32, 33 lakh crores. So what really happens is very limited space to accommodate all the wishes which we have been talking about as to what the government should do. So if you have to really be practical about it, I would say that we need to actually separate policies which are actually outside the budget. Okay, because lots of things which you're talking of, things like climate change, yes, we can, as economists, we can always bring in directly saying you can give some tax incentive, some punishment for doing something which is nasty in life. But practically speaking, I think these are not things which are going to come in the budget. And if you have realized in the last, I don't know how many budgets, I've been tracking it for my entire career, there's always a case of saying we have lots of expectations on the day of the budget. Believe me, on Wednesday morning, read the newspapers, all the CEOs, all the experts will come together and say we give 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. Talk to them in their bedrooms or in their drawing rooms, they will say, kuch nahi hua. And the reason kuch nahi hua is actually the budget cannot do much. There can be a lot of articulation. So there's always be some 10, 12, some nice acronym will be there saying that we should be looking at so many objectives in future. But at the end of the day, I think I would go a lot with what Radhika was saying, that fiscal prudence, fiscal discipline is something which we'll be looking at. That 4.5% is the immediate goal, and everything is going to center around that. So all the tinkering which is done, the language which is used, the articulation, talking of what our long-term goals will keep all of us happy because there'll be something for all of us, which happens every time. But is the budget doing something, or is the budget supposed to actually make an allocation, coming up with new programs? PLI was the last program which it came up with. Otherwise, you have certain social welfare schemes, PM Kisan, which came up in 2019. That was a specific scheme which was coming. Now, once you have that scheme, you cannot withdraw it. All these numbers have been more or less fixed. So if you look at the interim budget, all the expenditures have been fixed either to the revised or the budgeted number of the 2022-23. So that is 23-24, sorry. So therefore, all these numbers are fixed. So I don't think there's too much of flexibility in all these things. I think the whole thing is that, okay, I got an additional 1 lakh crores from the government. So let me try and make sure I move towards the 4.5% number. Now, one point I'd like to highlight is that as we move towards the 3% mark, now I don't know why we follow 3%, but that is some kind of a rule which came down. Nobody knows why 3, why could not be in 3.5, why not 4? We have stuck to 3. I would like to flag that there's going to be a fiscal cliff. What we are talking of a fiscal cliff, at some point of time, when we come down to 3%, we'll see the amount which we are borrowing in the market because of the fiscal deficit coming down. Even if I assume 11% growth in my nominal GDP, we will be actually borrowing less than what we borrowed during COVID times and post-COVID times, which means we'll have to seriously think purely from the point of view of mathematics. How do I actually rationalize all these numbers? Can I still keep giving free food? Can I still give 2 lakh crores subsidy, food subsidy, 2 lakh crores of fertilizer subsidy, so on and so forth? That's going to be the major challenge for the government. So every time I bring the fiscal deficit down from 5.1 to 4.5%, I'll also have to see what all tinkering has to be done with the numbers which I have in terms of my expenditures which have been committed. So I think that's going to be the major thing. Otherwise, I think in this budget, I'm not looking for anything. Few things to make all of us happy or make us sad. Some tax rates go up, something comes down, something they'll say we're doing for technology, something for education. Education, I think, is a more serious issue. It's not tackled in the budget. I think when you talk of the new education policy, we can have another big debate about whether that's right, wrong, whether it's actually leading us anywhere. Because today, personally, I believe if you don't have an English education, you can't enter the private corporate sector. I've been in the private corporate sector all my life. So in the last couple of years, you will get a government job with a local language, but otherwise you can't enter the corporate sector if you don't have an English education. So that's a more serious issue. I don't think the budget is going to talk about it. Now, coming to specifically to the question which you're talking of disinvestment, I think that a lot of social programs of the government have been driven by the public sector banks. Today, the government has invested a lot to recapitalize them, clean up the balance sheets. So I don't think, I mean, it's a hard call for the government to take. Do I want, and I'm getting a very good dividend. I'm getting a very good return from the public sector banks. So, and today, just remember the Jan Dhan program is run exclusively by public sector banks and RRBs. The private sector banks don't get into these kind of programs. You're talking of your Mudra loans, it's always the public sector banks who are doing it. So I think as long as the government has this broader agenda, it's going to be a tough call for them to take. Today, I think most of the public sector banks are very healthy, may get very good valuations. But there's a kind of a trade-off. It's not for me or you to decide what it is. The government will have to take this call. Similarly, even when you're talking of disinvestment of, say, the oil companies, when crude oil price went to 140, 150, I still continued paying 100 rupees for my petrol. If I'm going to privatize and say you have market pricing, we would have reached a situation where I might have been paying 150 rupees for petrol, and all of us would have been cribbing about it. So I think disinvestment today, I think all the low-hanging fruits have been plucked. Today, it will have to be more of ideology. The government will have to have the trade-off, and it's their prerogative. It's not for us to question it. But they will have to say, if I'm going to privatize these companies, certain objectives, some of my plans may not be able to run in the same way as what they did earlier. So that is something which we would like to hear from the government. It's not for us to say that it should be. There are always arguments for not doing any particular thing, especially when it comes to disinvestment. But it's a kind of a concerted call which the government will have to take. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you so much. I think we are out of time, so I will actually thank the esteemed panel and request the 4 team to just take over. Would you like me to summarize? I can very quickly. I think there were a few themes that came through. I think focus on the medium or long term was something that several people said. But at the same time, there's the opposite view that the budget is not the place to lay out a focus on medium or long term. Typically speaking, it's a policy call, it's a policy document that someone should be putting out and not necessarily the budget. And it's an open call, right? Like I think other countries do it in many different ways. It's since 1991 that we've been doing it like this. The other thing that we heard is just demand is an issue, right? And I think while I agree that demand and private investment is an issue, I do think that there is a slight addition there of it's not just domestic demand. We must figure out how to tap into international demand. One very sort of basic figure, right? Merchandise exports, India's share in the global market is 1.8% of merchandise exports. Our working age population share is approximately 20% of the working age, world working age population. China's share of the merchandise exports in the world is 15%, right? So we are 1/10 of where China is. We are 1/20th almost, or something like that, of what our working age share is. So somewhere we are not pulling our weight in the international market. Budget by itself may not have too much to do, but like Dr. Singh was saying, ease of doing business, private investment, tariffs on how we do things, taxation, all of these things have to be rationalized in a way that makes India competitive in the world market, in the way that drives growth, more broad-based, more labor-intensive, drives employment. And I think that's where I will stop. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Really enlightening discussion for me, and I hope it was for everyone else. Absolutely. Questions from the audience? There's a hand up here. Will someone take a mic to them? Request you to please quickly introduce yourself, which panelist you have a question for, and then your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. So enriching debate. I'm Basant Potnuru. My question is that, what has emerged from the discussion is that if we have to take few points, one is that our expectation to lower interest rates so that, and also allow the inflation benchmark a little bit higher, promote effective demand, private investment, and a growth. Looking at this situation, is the policy of minimum income guarantee scheme has the potential to take India from the current growth of 6.5 to 7% to that of something 8.5 to 9% quickly in the immediate short term. After that, of course, the right policies, you may say that this scheme might backfire in the long term. But of course, if the right policies are followed up, and that would work better. I would like to see from the 6 distinguished panelists, how many thumbs up would be there for this scheme at this current juncture. Thank you.
A minimum income guarantee scheme. Are people in favor of it? I'm not.
I think this is certainly a time has come when we could really afford and give minimum income guarantee. And that may be one of the quickest way to increase demand in some sense. And of course, I think we have the infrastructure now to see that the minimum income guarantee is given without excessive leakages and so on in terms of Aadhaar in bank accounts and so on. So I think direct benefit transfer of the kind is possible. And I think it is time we should seriously consider that.
Mr. Sabnavis, why don't you proceed and I'll ask Dr. Singh to pitch in after that. You're on mute, sorry.
No, actually, you have to unmute me, and I'm not have to unmute.
Oh,
See, actually,
okay.
there's no specific minimum income guarantee scheme which is provided by the government. Let's make that very clear. This was mentioned by Arvind Subramaniam at one point of time in the economic survey. We don't have such a scheme running. Now, whether we should be having it or not is that, see, we already have a PM Kisan where I'm giving cash. I have a NREGA program. We don't have too much productive activity. I'm still spending 70, 80,000 crores every year. So I think giving any kind of a minimum income is one thing is that creates a moral hazard that I don't want to work. Okay, that's another issue which comes up. But in the short term, I think these kind of things can be welcome, any kind of an income transfer because of the high level of deprivation. As I go back to saying that if 800 million people don't have require food, free food from the government, so there's a large number which requires. This actually goes against the CLEMS data, which Radhika was talking about, where we're saying that 650 million people actually have jobs. So I think there is some reconciliation to be done. If 650 million people have jobs, let's assume even two people to have two heads in the family, I'm talking of 1,300 people having some kind of an income and a population of 1,400 million via 800 million people getting free food. I mean, that's something which one needs to think more deeply. But I think in the short term, it's something which is required, but you need to obviously target the people right. But it cannot be a long-term strategy. We need, see, all the time we're talking about having education, skilling up people. At the same time, we can't say I'm giving a minimum income for not doing anything productive, I mean.
I think one question to consider with all of these is if you do it in the short term, can you ever take it away? It just
Yeah, you can't
automatically-
actually. That's a problem. See, PM Kisan cannot be withdrawn. NREGA cannot be withdrawn. They get institutionalized. Yeah?
My own personal opinion is I really don't like building people who are so much dependent on subsidies and minimum. You have given them free food for 5 years. I think that's much more than what was really needed. You have given to the population, which is much more than what is really poverty stricken and deserved it. So in a way, the people who did not need it, you have given them surplus food. What are they going to do with it? They're going to go to the nearest retail market and dispose it. The minimum income has been ensured in that sense. So I think minimum income is not done. Otherwise, you will have a bunch of lazy people in the country thinking, okay, food is there and every medical facilities are also easily available. Why should I work? Why should I struggle? What's the point of giving them education if they're looking for minimum income? They should be given education and told, now you earn your way. The other thing is where I come in is certainly support the elderly in the family. When you support elderly in the family and give them some old age, minimum old age pension, then you are ensuring that part of the money based on accountability and responsibility is entering the family cycle. Be it medical, be it minimum support for some fees for some child. To that extent, indirectly, you have ensured some consumption demand has been maintained. But guaranteeing minimum income can be counterproductive.
Yeah, actually, Rahul, can I just come in here? One point. See, we saw after COVID, Western nations had a problem because they gave lots of people this unemployment benefit and gave them income. Though those guys were refusing to come back to work because they were getting that scheme. So we should keep that in mind. Yeah?
See, basically, to add to that, see, Western world always had a system of, protecting your income, but protecting the income came after protecting your other things like health. Today, your healthcare cost is so high. So when we did a study and we did a survey, people said, look, I would like my healthcare, education cost, my social cost to reduce if you take care of that. And I am happy to work and earn. And if if the job market is opened up by skilling, etc., that's my priority. So when we actually did a survey, people didn't rank minimum income at all. So we may be thinking about it is important because we often look at the Western world model, but in those models, you first take care of your health, you take care of the basic education, then all the other social needs, and then minimum income comes.
And I mean, in COVID, when they gave the thing, you can see what inflation resulted, right? Like massive inflation spikes in the West. Radhika, on this, do you have a view?
I have. Good afternoon, panel.
Yeah. So I agree with Dr. Singh that, I mean, this minimum income guarantee scheme, there will be fiscal implications given that we are already having the PM Kisan, we are having the free food grain, we are having fertilizer subsidy, and given that fertilizer prices are rising, there could be an enhanced allocation of fertilizer subsidy. So where is the fiscal space? And given that health education as a percentage of GDP expenditure is not rising, so there has to be some reprioritization of expenditure amongst the given heads, and that could be disturbed if we go down the path of the minimum income guarantee scheme, because once these schemes are introduced, it's very difficult to roll them back. Thank you.
There's a question from here somewhere. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, panel. My name is Dirgaj. I'm from International Business Batch. Arpita ma'am, I would like you to address my question. So when you said that the health sector needs focus, we also found that the vitamin D deficiency is rampant now. So the thing is that, is there a scope for uniform midday meal schemes? Because different states are having different midday meal schemes. Plus the Anganwadi workers, which are working throughout different states, they are providing the provisions at homes as well. Now there we are witnessing pilferage. On the other hand, if we get this uniform midday meal schemes, then is there a scope for revising the Mission Indradhanush as well as Poshan Abhiyan? So how this can be done?
This is a very good question, but not related to the budget, but still let me answer it. See,
I was relating it to the budget because of the allocations which are coming for Indradhanush and Poshan.
See, basically in India, the diets are different across the countries, and how you design the diet, you have a flexibility. At the state level for any subject like health or education, states do have a flexibility to reorganize the diet as per the diet pattern of the state. But states which has been able to add the supplement or fortified the diet, for example, Rajasthan in case of iodine, they have seen a progress, So what the ICMR and others and we are trying to do through our project is to actually is still going on, because you see the survey is going on, but to identify that how you put it through the diet, because finally the diet is actually in the hand of the state. But as of now, what is happening is that flexibility and working with the state is not there. We also may need to have some kind of a food council or the nutrition council like the GST council, where the states representative sit with the central and they think about, what happens in the budget is that those thought processes are not put prior to the budget, and they think about for the future budget, how do we actually design policies which are linked to the nutrition. So it requires definitely an interaction between the center and state.
So one last question.
Hi, panelists. It's an honor for us to be a part of this whole discussion.
Please,
It
can
felt,
you please
am
a
I
little
audible?
louder?
Yeah. So it felt as if a lot of stream of knowledge was flowing on. But my question is to Mr. Charan Singh and also to Mr. Parekh. First of all, in terms of agriculture, we have technological integration and artificial intelligence. So we've seen a migration from rural to urban, but why don't we skill the people who are there in rural itself, have refresher training, integrate that with the technology itself, and that could increase the percentage of people who are working in agriculture. One is that because we are heavily dependent on organic farming, and also a lot of youth is also moving towards organic farming. The second question is, a lot of youth is moving from India outside and they're working for the other developed nations. Hence, there's a lot of brain drain that is going on. Why don't we incentivize the youth, especially the Gen Zs and the millennials, to stay in India itself, educate themselves here, improve our education system, and then they work for our nation itself?
Okay, I think if I've understood your questions correctly, what you are saying is, why can't we create employment in rural areas so that rural-urban migration can be stopped? And I think this has been something that has been, suggested for a long time, but we haven't done much. I think one of the important preconditioning for doing this is to have road connectivity and other information so that the cost of transporting goods would be minimized. And then have you could say agro-processing industries set up in rural areas. And that certainly is a possibility, but it requires, I think, again, the finance, again, the possibility of giving young entrepreneurs money without collateral, but with some kind of thing. And I think we need to really think about financial innovations to do some of these things. But I think it can be done. It should be done. The second question, I didn't quite get it.
So the second question was related to the migration of youth and Gen Zs from India to abroad. Why is the brain drain happening? Why not we incentivizing the youth to stay in India and work for India?
Yeah, I think people migrate from, say, Kerala to Dubai or from various places. It's just in case of getting higher income there. Though often the conditions that they live in is worse in some sense. They're not necessarily increasing their own well-being, but they're increasing the well-being of the family left behind. I think we should not grudge the fact that people are going abroad and so on for improving their economic well-being. We should really think about providing adequate opportunities for earning that kind of money in India so that you don't have temptation to go abroad. It's clearly profitable for a person to try to be unemployed and seek job. I mean, to be that way than to migrate to UAE or Dubai or wherever it is that they go. All right.
Rahul, may I give my 2 bits on this? Sorry.
So I would like to supplement Professor Parekh. See, I just think brain drain in one sense is better because Kamala Harris is now sitting there. She's our representative. And the next vice president, his wife is from this place, again, our representative. And I would expect in most countries, when Rishi Sunak became the prime minister, I thought, why should we not send many more Indians there? In next 15 years, I'll have how many prime ministers from India sitting in different countries? Means, please look at the positive side of it, be it Satya Nadella and all those people who are playing a big role. The point is, if we are 16% of the world population, I think 16% of companies listed on the stock exchange in New York should be headed by Indians. Because I've been sending them IIM students from 1975 onwards. If they are not able to capture 16% of big companies as CEOs, then I think I have sent inadequate brain drain. So I would be very happy. And they give me remittances. When they give me remittances, my oil bills and everything is taken care of. So on various platforms, be it economics, be it political, I benefit from the people who are going abroad. So I'll just narrate a story of Guru Nanak to you. Guru Nanak went to a village and they took so much good care of him. And he said, oh, you guys are so good. Ujad jao. Just disperse. And they said, Guru Nanak, we took so much care of you and you said disperse. Just go away. What is this? He said, wherever you go, you'll spread the good word. Right? So if Indians go abroad, they will get everybody do yoga. I'll be so happy. And if they are sitting in White House and 10 Downing Street, I'm thrilled. So I do not grudge people going out. The other thing which you mentioned is and we are so much in number. that if they go out in a way, they're helping wage get little higher here. The other point which you mentioned, the migration into rural urban. Now, I have a feeling that we are overpopulated in rural areas. There's so much of disguised unemployment there, so low productivity and so low wage rate. So obviously we need to, if not urbanize, at least have them employed in more better, higher wage rate jobs. So therefore, when people talk about these one-day trains, and they talk of the Japanese high-speed train which will run, I always look from the angle of people who could have never come to Bombay, or they were in remote places. Now with that, I've been to Tokyo myself, I've seen how the whole place is urbanized along with the track. Now, of course, everything in Tokyo is connected to that. But I would expect, I think the fast train is moving from Ahmedabad to Mumbai. I would expect the whole track to become extremely modern, in that sense, urban. And you will find lots of people who would never imagine to go to Bombay morning, evening, or weekdays. They will start doing it. So I would think the pressure on agriculture has to be reduced, and better if we reduce it earlier. Professor made a point on agro-processing industry. That is one of the traditional ways of making output in the rural sector get a better rate. But then who will do the agro-processing? Then the banks and the financial institutions and non-banking finance companies come into the point. The point that he made, who will fund them? That is, Professor, a very good point. And I've been requesting the FM and everybody, a time has come now to have a roadmap for the financial sector in India. The priority sector that we used to learn when we were in 1970s, that what should be the priority sector. The definition of priority sector has now to take agro-processing in a big way. And our agro-processing should not only be for making cane juice out of cane or orange juice out of surplus oranges. I think now we should start thinking in terms of floriculture and say our flowers have to be exported to 50 different countries. That will increase instantly, and with very little investment, engaging the banking and financial sector, including commercial and non-banking finance companies, to start in a way funding modernization of the rural area. Thank you.
Rahul, can I just have two
I
quick
can just add a sentence that the same thing I applied, suggested about unemployed going to Kerala, from Kerala to Dubai or Middle East, is the same thing applies to brain drain. Some people used to say that it's better to have brain drain to get the brain going into drains.
Rahul, could I just have my two things quickly? Okay, see that, is somebody else speaking? Rahul, I can't make out. Or could I go ahead?
Yes, sir, you can.
Okay, so two quick things. When you're talking of rural-urban migration, I think let's remember one thing, that we need to commercialize agriculture. Today, if you talk to a farmer, the son does not want to work on the farm because you're always rain dependent. Every time the monsoon fails in your region, then you have a question of taking your indebted, leads to farmer suicides, which we have seen in states like Maharashtra. So unless we make agriculture commercial, that's the only time when we'll see development taking place in agriculture. What Dr. Charan said is right. Productivity is low. Are we trying to push up productivity? I think what we read about Green Revolution, 1970s, it came to end after that. We've not seen any kind of a significant thing. So that's why I think that the farm laws which the government tried to impose have not been successful. That would have taken us steps further. The second point in terms of your brain drain, I think the two issues we should remember here. One, there's a push factor which is happening. I think because of the inequality which we have in India, rich have become too rich. So what happens is that my child will go to an IB school. Now, this didn't exist when I was a student, where you pay 10 lakh fees for your kindergarten student. Now, these are the children who take the IB education. You go ahead. The whole idea is that you can go to any country in any of the Western countries, finish your education, and you get a very good job. So that is a push factor happening. So the other part is what Dr. Parekh was saying. Yes, we have the poor people out here. You're not able to get a proper job. You don't mind going and staying in abysmal conditions somewhere in the Gulf area, and you're able to send money to support the families. So I think that's the second thing which is happening. And on the pull side, when everybody looks for a better life. So lots of us even go on holidays. We cannot stay there forever because nobody's giving me a job. Otherwise, if you look at the developed countries, you think of conditions, life conditions are very good. All of us would like to think our children go and settle down in these developed countries. So there is that lure which is coming from the pull side. So I think these are the factors which are actually driving this so-called brain drain.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We extend a heartfelt thanks to all the panelists for this insightful discussion. Your expertise and perspectives have enriched our understanding of the diverse aspects shaping India's economic future. The varied viewpoints shared today, from macroeconomic policy to sector-specific priorities to thought-provoking perspective on brain drain, have provided a comprehensive overview of the expectations and challenges ahead. We are grateful for your invaluable contribution made to this extremely informative session. I would now like to invite our chairman, sir, to present memento as a token of gratitude to Dr. Kirit Parikh, sir. I would now like to invite Vice Chairman, sir, to present memento to Dr. Charan Singh as a token of gratitude. I would now like to invite Treasurer, Ford School of Management, Mr. Vijay Gopal Pandey, sir, to present memento to Professor Arpita Mukherjee. I would now like to invite DG sir to present memento to Professor Radhika Pandey as a token of gratitude. I would now like to invite our director, sir, to present a token of memento to Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia as a token of gratitude. I would now like to invite Professor Surbhi Kaul, Professor in Charge for Research Lounge, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Firstly, thank you so much, Mr. Madan Sabnavis. Our gratitude will be posted to you to Mumbai for sure. Thank you so much for being here digitally with us. As we come close to the end of this panel discussion on the upcoming budget 2024, it's my honor and privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to all those who have made this event possible. Firstly, of course, first and foremost, of course, my extended deepest gratitude to all the distinguished panelists sitting here and of course digitally, Dr. Kirit Parekh, Dr. Charan Singh, Dr. Madan Sabnavis, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, Dr. Radhika Pandey, and of course our dynamic moderator, Dr. Professor and Sir Rahul Ahluwalia. Okay, an insightful analysis and expert opinions have truly enriched our understanding of the forthcoming Union Budget 2024. Your diverse perspectives have illuminated the complexities and potential impacts, making this session immensely valuable. Our heartfelt gratitude to our chairman, sir, for conceptualizing this idea. Sir, you are a guiding light for all of us. My heartfelt thank you to Vice Chairman, sir, to Director General, sir, to Treasurer FSM, and all the faculty members sitting here to make up for this event. My special thank you to Director, sir. Sir, you're always encouraging and always support us for such events. Thank you so much. I would also like to extend a thank you to Professor Shriparna Basu for her constant suggestions and tireless efforts. Your meticulous planning is the pillar of the success, ma'am. Thank you so much. My vote of thanks would be incomplete without mentioning the contribution of Professor Surinder Singh. Thank you so much for constantly supporting this event. As we move forward, may the insights gained today help us navigate the financial landscape of the upcoming year with greater clarity and preparedness. We wish to see India on the top list always. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
I would now request to faculty members, FPM scholars, and media representatives to join us for a high tea in Pragya Hall.